Y'all, I recorded like a third of this video and then realized I didn't have a microphone in my hand. Hi, my name's Amanda, and welcome to Catholicism. I have decorated my place, and I have also decorated my face. I also have hairy armpits. Just get over it now, okay? Get over it now. So I would like this video to be sort of the origin story of catechisms. I'm going to go through the timeline of my faith and all the contributing factors of Catholicism and like just how freaking Catholic I grew up. It's I feel like it's intense. If it's not, comment below to disagree. And then I'm going to go through like the effects that it had on my personality. Because Catholic guilt, it's really huge. I'm going to do a video just on Catholic guilt itself because it's that huge of a topic and has that huge of an impact on us here Catholics. And then we're going to get into sort of the unraveling. It starts kind of slow and then it goes real fast. So come along for this ride. Let's start the timeline. I kind of wish I had pictures of me in all my sacraments. I think I just have my confirmation. The only person, the thing is that the people that would have these pictures, I'm currently no contact with. So it's just gonna have to work out like that. I might use just pictures of me like at those various times because to me, especially in my like CPTSD healing, it's odd to look at a picture of me at 8 years old and being like, wow, she was getting stress migraines and pelvic floor spasms. She was 8 years old. And of course, that's what this channel is here for, to talk about what she was so stressed about and to have an excuse to do my hair. So let's get into it. So, I was born and baptized in 1991. That is kind of a point of contention I have heard from other Christian denominations, is that Catholics baptize their children as infants. This comes from the fact that we want our kids to get into heaven right away, no matter what happens, and that we want them to be free of sin before they can even open their eyes, really. In my experience, I feel like babies get baptized within like a month or three, I'd say. Some people want to know like their babies, schedules and cycles so that they're like ideally asleep for the whole ceremony. Um, but that is an odd thing to me now, looking back. I mean, there's certainly a discussion that we can and should have respectfully in the comments below about just children getting baptized generally, because as someone with her master's degree in child and adolescent psychology, and it's over there and it's stuck on the wall because I put it there and I don't want to take it down. Informed consent is really huge to me, and informed consent, especially when you're talking to tiny people whose brains are not fully developed, and having them make like commitments because their fate after death depends on it. Little odd. Little odd. But again, if you have stories about like I believe Mormons get baptized at like 8. I had experienced people in my high school get baptized when they were like 13 or 14. If you have a story like that, I would love to hear about it. Um, or if you're just like, yeah, why that is weird to just dip a baby in water and be like, you're good. Um, there's also a whole nother discussion about this, where purgatory comes into play. But that's in theory. So purgatory, if you're not familiar, Catholics believe, I think still, I think there's some discourse happening about purgatory fairly lately, but I've not been involved in it. But it's sort of this middle ground area where it's more about like learning about the correct way to live, which is Catholicism. Catholicism is the correct way, is what we were taught. And then like once you've done all your learning in purgatory, you could graduate to heaven. And basically, I think the argument of like, well, what if you have a baby and it dies before it's baptized? My baby's gonna go to hell? That's crazy. And they're like, no, you probably won't give us your money if you think that. They're gonna learn. They're gonna learn about Jesus in purgatory, and then your little baby goes to heaven. And I think that was also like if someone's a good person, but they're of a different faith. Purgatory first, then heaven. Um, I've spent this is just the first few months of my Catholicism, and look how much I'm talking about it. So from there, we would go to church every single Sunday, and we were always taking it very seriously. Like, sometimes I'm sure kids either go into like a separate room so they can be a little noisy during Mass, they can have a snack, they can play with some toys. Not us. We were always in the front row for every single Mass. And my mom told me that she's like, yeah, I'd bring coloring books for you, but they were all religious coloring books. So committing fully to the bit, no wiggle room to think about anything else. We're in God's house on God's time. We're going to do God stuff. I remember being little in the pews and like trying to imagine like tiny little creatures because like when the kneelers were up, it kind of looked like just smaller pews like I was sitting on. So I'm like, oh, what if tiny little people like those were their pews and their kneelers are like, they're just so small I can't see them. And what would it be like to be in that great? And what would Mass look like from that perspective? And my goodness, there are so many chandeliers. How do they clean these chandeliers? Because everything's so high up. Godly thoughts. And I, though, also used to be so intense in participation. And looking back, it's just like, I've just always been a theater kid, right? Because a Catholic Mass has like strict blocking, choreography that's always going to be the same unless it's a very special occasion. There's music, there's lights, there's rituals. Like it's just putting on the same show every week. It's theater, and I love theater, and I wanted to be a part of it. So Catholic masses and perhaps other denominations of whichever, let me know in the comments below if there's any similarities here. But there's a procession coming in. So you've got like in my church growing up, we would have like the altar servers. So that's like the 2 or 3 middle schoolers who are gonna do things like light the candles, bring the priest the dishes for communion, and have him wash his hands and hold the book for the priest, because God forbid a grown man do anything by himself, right? That's a holy grown man, apparently more holy than you. And we'll get there in another video. And then you would have the lectors, so it's these 2 generally adult people who would do the readings in the Mass. There's a first reading and a second reading. If possible, they wanted to have 2 different people. You want to involve as many people as possible. Theater with a large ensemble versus theater with a small ensemble. Different tastes, but this was a big church. Big populace in that church. And so we wanted to use a lot of people. And so you've got the middle schoolers, the adult readers, and then you have the priest and a deacon if there is one. We rarely ever had one. And when this procession came in, it would come in one door and then down the aisle and back up this way. It was a whole thing, choreography, okay? And the altar servers would usually be holding something. So in our church, it would be like a candle, or it would be a big metal pole with a cross on it. And I would come into Mass like 4 or 5 years old with my little Jesus coloring book to the sky. I was walking in down that church aisle with the book above the head, one of those little like my first Bibles. I was like, yeah, I got this. Big holy book, raise it to the sky, all right? And then the cantor, because of course there's a lot of singing in the good Masses there is. So the cantor, when they're ready for everyone else in the congregation to sing, they put their arm up like this. And so would we, right? Well, I would at least, right? We're all in the front row, and I'm also raising my arm because it's time for everybody to sing. Theater! So I attended religious education programs from kindergarten through 8th grade, so ages like 5 to 13, 13, 14. I think I turned 14 in my last year of religious education. So the names tend to vary. I'm sure you've heard the letters CCD a lot when it comes to Catholic education. I'm not going to look it up because it doesn't matter to me anymore, but I believe that stood for Catechism of the Christian Doctrine. One of those C's is wrong though. um, our parish changed the acronym. Is it an acronym? Changed the name of it at some point in my years there. And so they changed it to PrEP at our parish. PrEP stood for Parish Religious Education Program. So for the sake of like, I don't know what every single parish called it, I'm just going to call it religious education. So basically, when your kid can attend regular school, you're going to also send them to learn about the Lord. And many people went through 6th grade because 6th grade in my parish was when you made the sacrament of confirmation. We'll get to it in a bit, but confirmation is sort of like the bat and bar mitzvah of Catholicism, except no part of it is fun. Um, you're just, you're supposed to memorize a bunch of questions about the faith. Your middle school face gets more oil slathered on it, and then you're considered an adult in the faith in 6th grade. But basically, in our parish, it happened in like November of the 6th grade year. And so those first couple months of religious education, we would have a full class of like 20 whatever kids. And then the end of November, suddenly 75% of those kids are gone. Like, I think we had 2 classes and then they just got merged into one because, like, for what, right? And that's when they gave us those Bibles. I think I just put it back on the shelf. Do I even have it on here? Oh, no, it's under there. I don't need it right now. We'll get it later. Oh, so basically, any people who stayed in religious education after that, for the most part, there was like 1 or 2 exceptions, but for the most part, you were there because you were going to play CYO sports or because you were, and slash, or you were going to be an altar server. So if you were going to be one of the middle schoolers that, you know, the stage crew of Catholicism, Catholic Mass, then you had to stay in religious education. You had to continue your journey with God. And also, if you were going to play sports with that Catholic school recreationally, you had to stay in parish religious education. So I get that. But oh gosh, how large was my 8th grade religious education class? I think it was truly 6 of us. Like, we went from having like multiple classes of about 20 to like 1 class of 6. It is crazy. So when we moved in with my mother's mother, we had a bowl of holy water at our front door. So this tells us a lot. So first of all, my mom and my dad, though they both went to Catholic school when they were young, my mom's side was like the way more Catholic side. Like, I think my dad and his sisters went to Catholic school just because at the time they were thought to be better schools. The more hardcore Catholicism is definitely coming from my mother's side. Though it is interesting to think about how they did both go to school with nuns that would hit you with rulers. That era of Catholic school speaks volumes about them as people. Having holy water at your door, again, if there's any similarities to other denominations, let me know. But in Catholic churches, at every single entrance, of a Catholic church, on the inside of it, there is a bowl of holy water. And it is full all the time except for Lent, because that's a period where we're very bad. We're bad, 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 bad people, and we don't deserve holy water until Jesus comes back on Easter. Because we're bad and we don't deserve things. But for the rest of the year, You are supposed to, when you enter and exit the church, dip your fingers into the holy water bowl and then bless yourself with the sign of the cross. And we had one of those in the front door of our house. So, I mean, I certainly did not do it as often. I don't think so. I don't remember doing so, but it was implied that when you come in or leave the place where we live, you are to treat it like you're supposed to be in church. The implications. Yeah, I didn't think about the implications. And if you get that reference, we can be friends. So something I'm not I don't know how to feel about now is when we had friends sleep over, like Saturday night into Sunday, those friends were also coming to church with us. And I don't know the whole consent about it at the time. We lived in a town that was like a large amount of people were Catholic anyway, that I don't know that it would have really been like something super contentious, but just that idea itself of like, oh, your friend who is in a different family, who we certainly cannot guarantee practices religion in the same way that we do, they're coming with us. And they're going to sit and stand and kneel and be told that they're bad. And then when it goes time to eat the special cracker, we're going to make them sit back in the pew by themselves and make them feel bad. Like, that is, it's iffy to me now. And if you feel differently, or if you feel the same and you'd like to express why, let me know in the comments. Now, here's the even bigger thing. If we could not make it to church in a weekend for whatever reason, and the reason had to be pretty big, right? Because again, we had the Saturday vigil mass that we could go to, and anywhere we were on vacation, we found a church and we were going there on Sunday. We were going down the shore, we're going to church. We're going up to Syracuse, we're going to church in Polish for some reason. Anywhere we were going to church. So if there was for whatever reason we were not going to church that weekend, you know we were going to confession the next weekend to confess that we missed a week at church. Because that was really bad of us, right? That was so bad. We're so bad and we deserve nothing because we're so bad. Because we didn't go to church. We have to go see a man in a dress and say we're sorry. Because we didn't give God money for a week. I'm just riffing here. This is always a new discovery of something absolutely crazy in the Catholic Church when you're talking about it. This is maybe probably a theme. No, this is definitely a theme. Certainly in other denominations of Christianity. And if you're not a Christian, I would love to know if you grew up with this theme, if you grew up in a religion as well. But it was very much like, we are the correct religion. We're the ones that are correct. All those other people who, made their schisms because they wanted to negotiate with God, but we don't negotiate with God. Some guy tells us what God told him, and we've been following it for thousands of years. So, confession, or rather, the nicer name for it is reconciliation. That's the second sacrament that you tend to make in the Catholic Church. The first being baptism, where you get dunked in holy water, and your godparents promise that, you're going to believe in God for as long as they're alive. And then confession or reconciliation happens when you are 7 years old. You have to confess that you're a bad person to a man in a dress at the age of 7. Otherwise, you can't move on to First Communion. So you can't have the magic Jesus cracker unless you confess that you're a bad person at 7 years old. This is building up so nicely, isn't it? So anyway, naturally, I'm nervous as fuck, right? Like, the most nervous I've ever been in my life. At 7. It's okay. understand that I'm laughing because I'm laughing looking back at my own personal experience. I don't actually find this funny. It's just like so much of my life and so many of the struggles that I had and so many of the deep, like, rock bottom pits just make so much more sense when you talk about like literally I've been saying every week for my life for 7 years, Lord, I am not worthy to receive you. Every week for 7 years. Like, and so I'm sure this varied with, the parents that you were raised with as well. And my mother certainly has a very strict view of God. Her God is a very punishing God. And so that's the God I grew up with too. And so I was very nervous to like say all of my sins, which all of my quote sins at that age, which by the way, I would love to do another video about like what sin actually is because it is not what people think it is. But my sins were like fighting with my sister, who was like 4, right? And um but I'm remembering I said in confession that I had lied, but I think I lied about that because I didn't have enough sins. I'm hoping that's not true. I'm sure I didn't lie. I lived in a very high stress house, and children who grow up in high stress houses learn how to lie because they have to survive. So you could choose to be in a confessional like booth, right? So like there's just a little like tinted window in between you and the priest. Who, and let me clarify something here. So you're not technically telling the priest what you did wrong according to Catholicism. According to Catholicism, this priest, before he does confessions, goes into what is called in persona Christi. He does it before Mass too, where it's like he's just kind of asking Jesus to take the wheel. You know what I mean? So like he's like, Jesus, come in and be my spirit, and so we're actually telling Jesus what we did. So that certainly probably added to the nerves. I'm like, oh my God, this is my first time talking to God. So anyway, so it's a confessional booth is where you got a little tinted screen in between you and Jesus in another face, or you could do face to face. And I don't know what in my little 7-year-old heart drove me to go face to face, but that's what I did. I have never gone to face to face. Nope, that's a lie. I went to face confession one other time in college. Holy moly. There's a story with that one. But every other time, I don't think that's even been an option. It's just been the booths because who wants to go look a man they barely know in the face and be like, these are the ways in which I have messed up in my life. These are all the ways in which I am flawed. Tell me what to do about it. Like that's an odd experience. So I chose to go face to face with the priest that had baptized me. And in theory, in my little 7-year-old head, I was like, this priest will do all of my sacraments and it'll be like, I don't know, be extra special for a reason that I certainly can't figure out now. Okay, so the in persona Christa thing is because somebody asked me about this in college. I was working at a campus ministry leadership institute, and one of the people I was doing the work with, I forget which denomination of Christianity he was, but he was not a Catholic. And when we had confessions at that leadership institute, he asked me about it. He's like, I don't get it. Like, why can't you just be like, sorry, Jesus, in your own home and like move on with it? And I think through my heavy experience in Catholicism, I think it's, I mean, at some point it probably came from indulgences, right? The Catholics' history of like, I can make this sin go away with God if you pay the right price. But something wants to tell me, something in me wants to believe that it's kind of about accountability. So like If I, I'm trying to come up with a sin. If I was rude to a cashier at the grocery store, I could just get in my car and be like, I was kind of an asshole back there. Sorry, God. Or you can tell somebody else that you did that and they could be like, hey, why are you taking out your anger on other people? Is this a pattern? So I'm sure at some point that nice part of it was in the instructions for, confessing to a physical person. But who knows? Certainly not me. So, like I said, the sacrament of reconciliation is in preparation for you to be like pure and holy enough to receive the Lord via the Eucharist. They also gave us like this ring. I remember us getting a ring. I don't remember what the ring was for. It wasn't like a purity ring. It was, I don't know, we just had a ring and I wore it for a really long time. So we practiced receiving communion in second grade CCD. So it was just, you're gonna hold out your hands like this. You're gonna put your dominant hand underneath your non-dominant hand. The priest will put the communion in there. You pick it up, put it in your mouth. You do a little sign of the cross, and then you move on. And this differs from, you can still go up and just be like, and the priest will put it in your mouth. And Latin Mass, that's very much what they still do. You don't touch the Eucharist because you're bad. You're a bad, unholy person and you don't deserve to touch the Jesus cracker because you're bad. I don't know if it's going to be here or later in the video, but I really want to use that clip from Disenchantment where Beanie joins the nunnery and their morning little hymn before they eat their nothing soup.
I am bad and you are bad and we are bad together. Humanity's a wretched lot, but God is slightly better.
And like nailed it on the head. That's Catholicism. That's Catholicism. I just smacked myself in the chin with the microphone. So again, we practiced in CCD, and I remember being so mad because this one kid kept messing up on purpose. Because of course we were practicing with like M&Ms or Smarties or something. We were practicing with candy, and this kid kept messing up on purpose so he could get more candy to practice, and it worked. I was so mad. I was so mad. I'm like, this is. I was such a goody two shoes, such an eldest daughter, such a Catholic. I was so mad at this kid. And I'm hearing it in my tone that maybe I am still mad. So my first communion was on my birthday, which I thought was extra cool. Reconciliations tend to happen in like February and like Lenten season. And then first communions tend to happen in the spring, post Easter. And my birthday is always post Easter, just because of how the calendar fluctuates. And I remember going to pick out my little communion dress, which, by the way, has to be white. I don't know about, of course, boys have fewer rules, because in what religion do boys not have fewer rules? But we were going to look at dresses, and I saw this gorgeous little sleeveless dress, and okay, I'm just going to reveal it right now. My birthday is April 25th, which, if you know anything about the meme or the movie Miss Congeniality, is the perfect date because it's not too hot, it's not too cold. All you need is a light jacket. And I'm looking at the sleeveless dress and I'm like, yes, that's what I want to wear to my first communion. And my mom and grandma were like, are you sure? Like, what if it's cold? And I said, it's always nice weather on my birthday. And of course, it was beautiful, like 75-degree and sunny weather on my first communion / birthday. So that was cool to to get you first communion presents, but it was also my birthday present. So now that I'm thinking about it, that's not that cool. But I'm sure it was cool if you were an adult being like, all right, it's a twofer. We don't actually need to get her stuff. But yeah, my 8th birthday party was my first communion. All right, let's get into confirmation. So another part of confirmation is you have a sort of day-long like retreat. So you would be taken out of school and you would do just confirmation prep for like the whole day instead. We did like these decoration things. I'm sure we talked about these questions that we were so like everybody insisted that the bishop, because okay, here's the thing about confirmation. And I'm going to say that about 15 different things about confirmation, because confirmation to me, the more I think about it, the crazier it is. So your regular old average priest cannot confirm people into the church. Now, based off of what I've seen in RCIA, I don't think that's true. But you would have a higher up called a bishop come in to the different parishes of the archdiocese, kind of like the groups of churching, doesn't matter. Um, and then do the confirmations. And we're like, this is this higher up priest, this man that we don't know, who is, from what we've been taught, closer to God than we are. And he's going to ask us a bunch of questions about the faith. And if we get them wrong in front of the whole church, I don't think anything was going to happen. But they were like, you need to have these answers correct, or like everyone in the church is going to be embarrassed in front of the bishop. And we're 11, okay? We're 11 years old. There was a list of like 100 questions that we were told we were certainly going to be asked. The priest was going to ask us. We had no idea who was going to be chosen. And then confirmation comes, and the bishop does not ask one single fucking question. Like, what the fuck did I just study and stress myself out for? Like, I know every type of oil that we use for different sacraments, and what is that specific piece of artwork on the thing container that holds the communion? What does that mean? And what is this specific candle for? Like, what? And then he didn't ask a single question. I was furious, devastated. Who knows? So anyway, we needed to know all this information, and we needed to also choose a name that we were going to add to our names, not legally, but the name of a saint whose life you were going to try to mirror, essentially, because you're an adult in the faith now. Have I mentioned we were 11? Did I talk about that? How you're considered an adult in the church at age 11? That's cool and totally normal. So, again, this sacrament, I'm so nervous about it because I'm 11 years old and I don't feel ready to be an adult. Fucking weirdo, right? Um, and you're supposed to wear red because red's the color of the Holy Spirit or something. And then it's underneath like this white kind of graduation robe. And I'm wearing the robe and I'm looking in the mirror and I'm just like so nervous. And my mom was not the least bit comforting. She was like, you know what? One day you're going to be in another white dress and you're going to be more nervous. And I was like, why are we doing this right now? Can you please tell me this isn't supposed to be scary? So, based off of just how many kids completely disappeared from religious education class, that was sort of my first inkling that maybe not everybody takes Catholicism as seriously as we did. And we developed a little bit of a complex about it for sure, which was, I mean, and by we, I mean my mother certainly had it, and it got passed down to me for a bit. My grandmother certainly had it. I can't tell you about my sister. I don't know how she felt about it. But there, my mom used to call it the occasionals. There was a name she had for people who went to Christmas and Easter only, or Christmas, Easter, and occasionally, CEOs. I'm sure other people have different names, and I'm sure that's across denominations too. Like everybody feels like you go to church Easter and Christmas, and that's that. I certainly have nothing to say about that now. I don't go to church for any of it. So I was an altar server in 7th and 8th grade. That's why I remained in religious education. I loved being a part of the Sunday stage crew. And then after that, because there was so much demand to be an altar server in our parish that they just cycled you out. You did it for 7th grade and 8th grade, and then they cycled you out because there was just kind of, I wonder if it's still like that now. But there was just always kind of like an abundance of altar servers. I had a friend in a nearby parish who was an altar server like all the way through high school. But in our parish, they kicked you out after 8th grade. So once I was done with religious education and with being an altar server, I then became a lector. So I don't know about my parish's whole history, but at the time I was certainly the youngest lector by a long shot. Like I was 14 years old and everybody else was like minimum 42. So I was, reading, and I'm sure the church loved it. They're like, yes, youth engagement, show them that reading at church is cool. Um, though I was in no way, shape, or form cool. Set the record straight there, right there. Never have, never will be cool, and that is very okay. Now, here's something that maybe caused a stir. Like, I always kind of think about this, and I'm like, I wonder if people talked about that later. Um, but when it comes time to eat the Jesus cracker at Mass, the altar servers line up, the lectors line up, and the Eucharistic ministers, the people who are going to hand it out to everybody else. So everybody's all lined up. And we all get the Jesus cracker. And then typically at my parish, the priest would then hand out the wine to just the people around the table, not the rest of the congregation. We had a really big congregation, okay? The wine budget would have been insane. Insane if that's something we did at our church. And now the altar servers would get the communion and they would never stay for the wine. But I was a lector now. I was 14 years old. I was a lector. And I just thought, you know what? That's not actually wine, right? You're telling me that during the Mass, when you put your hands over it, you've turned that wine into the blood of Christ. So it's not wine anymore, right? It's not illegal for me to have this. And I stayed up there and I received the wine. And I just wonder if people talked about that. Because I was literally like, what, months to like a year older than the altar servers who didn't stay for the wine. But I was like, yeah, I'm an adult in the faith now. I'm a lector. I'm not one of these here altar servers. I'm a big girl. And I'm going to drink the blood of Christ. We can get into that another time too, whether like anybody actually really believes that happens. Yeah, still going to church every Sunday. Took a little break sometimes when I started to drive and I was in my really sinful years. This is, I was just partying a lot. Like the definition of partying is just so wide. Like I was drinking alcohol underage with my friends, doing a lot of that. But like on just like every other weekend, like drinking with my friends every other weekend. Those were my sinful years, and those are the times where I would say that I went to church, but I wouldn't actually go to church. But so, what I would do is I would look up what the reading was that day in case my mom asked. I would look up what the gospel was in case she asked. Because it's all on there. You could just go like, okay, next Sunday's readings. Like they have it set up well in advance. So you know what they're gonna say. So I didn't feel the need to go. I also had a complex about like I was drinking underage and I was having sex and I wasn't sorry about it. And so I was like, well, I can't go to confession and lie to the priest about being sorry about it because I'm not. And if you're like sinful and haven't gone to confession, you like really technically aren't supposed to take the Eucharist either. It is a whole thing, okay? I had such a complex about this, and we are still untangling it, girl, because this is a tangly web. When I went away to college, so I was community college for a bit, and then I went away to school in a different state, and at the suggestion of my mother's mother, I joined the Newman group. So Newman groups at colleges are named for John Henry Newman, who I think is a saint. Is definitely a trailblazer and like young adult faith practice, or at least was supposed to be. So in that group, I really liked my time with the Newman group. I will say of all of my like Catholic years, the least regrettable was my time with Newman. Um, because we did some really good stuff. Not every Newman group is the same, but we were like actually doing what Jesus said you're supposed to do. Like we were feeding the poor and giving drink to the thirsty, and we were building homes for people, and like we were doing shit. We were raising awareness for child tax credits for people. We were writing Valentines for veterans. Like we were like doing good work. Um and we were certainly more progressive of a group. Like I don't want to tell on anybody, but we had a spiritual advisor, we'll call them for the sake of privacy, that who and in the Catholic faith was like, actually abortion's more complicated than that. So that was a really nice place to be in my Catholicism, and I'm really, really grateful for my Newman years. There, I was a lector, I was a Eucharistic minister, I was in the choir, and I was the cantor once because our cantor couldn't show up, and I was going a cappella too. I did pretty good, but I was like, I don't ever want to do this again. I was the social chair for the executive board of our club for one semester. And then I was the president of that club for a year. I was the president of my college Catholic group in the year 2013. Okay, you want to talk about how Catholic I was? I was the president of a Catholic club in college. That's where we were at, okay? I was making decisions about events, faith-based events. I was having discussions with people. I was in it, okay? I went on 2 trips with this group with the organization Esperanza International. Esperanza International builds homes in the Baja California area of Mexico. And basically, like, you are building the houses with the community. Such an incredible experience. I could talk about Esperanza International for a whole nother video. But if you're interested, you can certainly look them up. Esperanza International. I'll spell that out on the bottom there. And because they're still doing what they do, and they could always use fundraising. And I have a super cute sweatshirt that I bought from them to help them fundraise, and they also are selling cases of wine. So, hey, you know, you want to support a really good cause and also drink a bunch of wine? Esperanza International. So then I moved to Brooklyn after college, and I went to church on and off there for about like 5 more years. It took me a while to find like a good parish that I really liked. So first I was in an area where I was subletting, and I was also just starting being a teacher. I was just too tired to like go anywhere or do anything. Then when I moved to my studio apartment, I went to what was the closest church, and the people there were just not, it's like they were barely awake. Like everyone at that church was barely awake, and I just did not vibe with it. And I found one that was a little bit of a further walk, but a smaller church and just like a different community and just much more engaging with their masses. And that is the timeline. I originally stopped going to church because of COVID, right? So I was like, I didn't feel obligated to go to church. And every now and then I would live stream mass still, okay? So as early as like, as late as like 5 years ago, I was still like tuning in and giving money to the church. Which I'm sure that there's not like a requirement like there is in the Mormon church, but there is sort of like an implication where it's like, you really ought to give us money. You know, the church has to run The church has to provide programs. The church has to keep their lights on. Give me your money. But then, yeah, once things started to clear up, the COVID times was also sort of a spiritual awakening for me. And so that was kind of another reason I didn't feel the need to go back. But let's get back to that in a little bit, okay? So, my section 2 here, I have the effect on my personality pre-healing. So, I just kind of wrote a bunch of potential things to talk about here. So, I'll just talk about what I haven't talked about yet. Certainly I think I've implied a few things in my tone through this video where it's like, you're bad, right? You're a bad person. You say so every week. You say, I'm a bad person. Please forgive me, God and the people around me, because I'm a bad person. So you're telling yourself you're a bad person every single week of your life. That can lead to some poor mental health. Studies have shown that if you think you're a shitty person, your brain is not going to like that very much. All anxiety all the time, because you're also just taught, God's everywhere. God's always watching. God's keeping track of your deeds at all times. See if you're going to heaven or purgatory or hell. And again, I'm sure this differentiates with the kind of Catholic parents you were raised with. But I was just thinking, like, oh my gosh, am I being good enough for the Lord? And the thing is, with really strict Christianity, good enough often just means quiet, no matter what you're going through. It means not complaining ever. It means saying the right words at the right times. It demands perfectionism. And yeah, when you're taught from birth that this is the correct way to do it, this is the way you have to do it to get into heaven right away. I thought I had an anxiety disorder for 3 decades, and then suddenly I just haven't experienced anxiety since. And that still baffles me. Like, moving on, because I'll talk about that forever. Everything felt like a test, and every action felt like it had to be the correct answer. Okay. Also, the idea, the Christian, from what I perhaps understand, very Calvinist, Puritan idea that suffering is good, actually. That, like, if you're suffering, you won't in heaven. God chooses his bravest soldiers, or Meanwhile, you're a kid being regularly abused, being told that you are bad by your family, by your church, and by your own words in church. And just the mental disorder that is causing then brings in more suffering, honestly, because you're not handling anything well, and people can't understand why you're reacting so weird. And I just really, really thought that I was put on this earth to suffer. And I was not meant to have anything good ever happen to me. And sure, it'll all be fine and great when I get to heaven. Except. And being raised in that kind of ideology also then tends to turn into, in my humble personal experience, into punishing yourself for nothing. For no reason. Like, there was one Lenten season. I was 15 and I had a boyfriend, and he was not Catholic. But I thought we should give up. I wanted to give up like making out for Lent, right? And so I was like, it's like we can like just smooch, but I don't want to be sinful, so I don't want to make out with you. And wouldn't you know it, within that Lenten period, we would break up. That was for a number of reasons of all really contributing from my poor self-esteem at the time. Um, and just Lent in general is like you have to give up something you like because Jesus died for you. A man that you never met died because you are bad, and you have to give up something that you love for 40 days plus however many Sundays were in between because you're bad and you need to repent for being bad. I myself was anti-abortion for a while. And that while, interestingly enough, is all before I started having sex. And then, I started thinking like, well, maybe just I wouldn't do it, but like other people shouldn't. But then I learned about like implications, right? Like how much money babies cost and how the United States of America does not support you at all in any stage of prenatal care, postnatal care. Hospital births cost like $14,000. Like, I was like, oh, you know what? That's fine, actually. Once I learned about the implications around like 19 or 20, I was like, no, you know what? We're good. Maybe I wouldn't do it. I've not, fortunately, not been put in a situation where I would have to make that decision. I think everybody else deserves the choice too, though. But yeah, just you're anxious that you're never ever doing anything right. You think that, suffering is good and you're not worthy of good things. That builds up to Catholic guilt. Which again, I think I mentioned already. I want to make a whole video on Catholic guilt because it's so huge. It wouldn't be a long video still, but just like it deserves its own full conversation because Catholic guilt, it's like so there's a clip from The Simpsons. I don't know if I'll be able to put it here, but it's when they send the baby to a daycare that's run by nuns, and the nun has a guitar and is singing to the kids, and she goes, if you're happy and you know it, that's a sin. And that is Catholic guilt. You're not supposed to do anything that brings you pleasure because you're supposed to suffer. Because suffering means going to heaven. Which is just so... I'm not thinking of the correct word. The word that I'm thinking of is sad, but it's not the correct word. But to be living in a life where you genuinely believe, without any proof, that when this body dies, you are going to be in eternal paradise, but you're not allowed to be happy at all in your very real, tangible life right now because of something that you can't guarantee will happen later. If you know the word for that, comment it below. So let's talk the slow unravel. The slow unravel. So I kind of want to only touch lightly on this because I do want to go more in depth on a video that, goes into this biblical trauma a little bit deeper. But on the surface level, they give us these Bibles in in religious education. They give us these Bibles, right? And I'm an adult in my faith now. I have a responsibility in my mind that I need to be totally competent and, no pun intended, but well-versed on my faith. And so I decided I'm going to read the Bible cover to cover. the book of Numbers, 0 out of 10. On cannot say hard enough. The book of Numbers is so boring. Don't do it. It's exactly what it says it is. It's a whole bunch of fucking numbers that were relevant then and are not relevant today. But I got to Deuteronomy. And Deuteronomy 23:2. In my translation, I need to get the Bible out for this one. Hold on. Let's read Deuteronomy 23:2, shall we? By the way, this whole chapter in this book, chapter 23 of Deuteronomy, the byline, the title of it is Exclusion from the Lord's People. These are all the people who don't belong to God. God made everybody, but he hates some of them. Deuteronomy 23:2. No one born out of wedlock or any descendant of such a person, even in the 10th generation, may be included among the Lord's people. No one born out of wedlock may be included among the Lord's people. I was born out of wedlock. And in the time of my life where I said I didn't want to get too deep into this. At the time that I was given this Bible, I was also experiencing terrible mental health on like 6 different levels, in terms of my very new period, in terms of not being as smart as I thought I was, in terms of not having any friends, in terms of my family just hating me, in terms of an 11 and 12-year-old's brain just kind of going crazy in the first place. I had dedicated so much of my life so hard to God, and this fine book told me I was going to hell anyway. So, that was my very first rock bottom, and we'll get into more detail on that another time. But essentially, coming out of that, I gave God the cold shoulder. I was like, fuck you. I don't belong to you. You don't belong to me. I'm going to Mass because I'm being dragged to, but I wouldn't say anything. That was my rebellious stage, right? Is I would still go to church, but I wouldn't say any of the words, right? I'd do the stand, the sit, the kneel, but I wasn't saying any words. And one Good Friday Mass. Now, Good Friday, if you're not aware, you might be, why do you call that Good Friday? It's when we commemorate Jesus dying. And I kind of want to put on lip balm right now, if you'll excuse me. Tinted. So I came back on a Good Friday, and it got to the part of the Mass where they said, like, and then, one last breath, whatever, he died. And I felt a swelling kind of in my heart that to this day I'm not going to pretend that I can explain. Perhaps it's just a very coincidental flutter in my heart, but something about that was like, this isn't about Old Testament God, this is about Jesus. And Jesus is about forgiveness, which can still get pretty tricky and toxic, but that's for another time. Jesus is about serving others. Jesus was about lifting up the oppressed. And if that's the part that I'm gonna stick with. So that was like, I was out, but I got back in. And I started also being questionable about the book of Revelations. Now, I have not read the book of Revelations myself, and I probably will for one of these videos, because it's, from what I've heard, a wild fucking ride. But my mother would talk about when the apocalypse days or whatever were coming, we would not have lights, right? Because the apocalypse, we're not going to have electricity, and we had to use very specific blessed candles. And I have some of them in this drawer right here. But I'll save that for a Revelations video. And that there would be so much chaos and fire and bloodshed and whatever in the streets, and we would have to board up our windows because if we looked at it, we would be sent. We would immediately die. I'm letting that sit because that's weird, right? And I remember questioning, being like, well, it's the end of the world, it's the rapture, right? Like, we want to not be on planet Earth anyway, right? Like, why wouldn't you want to die? Why? That seems easier than to sit there suffering and starving by candlelight, right? And she didn't have an answer to that. And there was just a lot of elements to Catholicism that I just didn't think about. And I do say that with like capital J, capital T, capital A. I just didn't think about it. And that's part of deconstruction, really, is being like, is finally thinking about it. It's like, do you really believe this? Like Jesus's miracles? I don't know that they happened literally like that. I don't know. That's maybe something I'll spend a video on, but it's like I don't think he turned water into wine. I think he just might have been able to convince people who were already so drunk that this was the best kind of wine. He was just like trying to make sure people didn't like drink and drive a cart, you know what I mean? And I think I've heard other Christians say like he didn't actually feed people with, 2 loaves and 5 fishes or whatever. Maybe it's switched. But like the miracle was that they shared. And so like I'd like to look into the miracles because that's something I just never thought about. Was just like, yeah. And then he raised some guy from the dead, you know? And I don't know that happened because sometimes what happens with figureheads, particularly those that fight to lift up the oppressed, is that you want to make them sound kind of supernatural. So it's like, not any old person can do this, right? They want to like make sure they distance everybody else from also having that kind of, I don't want to say power, I think that's the wrong word. Hopefully you understand what I'm doing. Like Dorothy Day, for instance. Dorothy Day? Yeah, Dorothy Day. She is quoted to say, like, please don't make me a saint. Because when you think of saints, you think of just like these people with folded hands and eyes to the sky who are very, very nice. And all they ever did was worship Jesus, and then they got murdered for worshiping Jesus. And it's like, that is certainly not the whole story for any of these people. And Dorothy Day did not want all of her hard work to be diminished and just to call her like a saint. She wanted, I guess, to remain known as an activist. And you'll never guess what the Catholic Church is doing, trying to make her a saint. We love consent in Christianity. We love it. I was also never really taught its violent racist history. So getting to know about that, how many people have been murdered in the name of Catholicism, how the Pope had, basically signed off on Manifest Destiny and was like, yeah, kill him if you have to. Make it God's country. That kind of just threw me off of it. Threw me off a little. And then, of course, there is the aspect that I am a queer person. I was not even able to come out to myself about this until I was like 22 years old. One, because it's kind of tricky when you're bi, because you're like, I can't be gay, I like men. Everybody wants to touch a girl's boobies and put the nipples in their mouth and touch other everybody wants to do that. Newsflash, they don't. And, my very Catholic relatives are not okay with it, have not been okay with it, and they made it known they were not cool with gay people even before I knew I was queer. So I'm not like super trying to hang out with people who are like love the sinner, hate the sin. Because those people have a weird, shitty definition of love too, and we can get to that another time. But my deconstruction like officially started in 2020. A little sprinkling of it began when I first approached my mother about the, no child born out of wedlock. And she said to me, we don't follow all of the stuff the Old Testament says. So that was my first, like, oh, so we cherry pick what we believe. That's interesting. But the real deconstruction started with 2020. I was going to therapy because I was a high school teacher in New York City at the time. And the September of 2020, they were basically saying, like, hey, we know that there's no vaccine available. And this disease is killing, hundreds of thousands of your neighbors. But we need you to come into work. Also, make sure your will is up to date. Because we had already lost a coworker, right? Somebody from who had worked at our school already had died from COVID. And they were just like, okay, well, go back. Just do it. And so I started therapy because I was like, oh, I'm not going to get through this year without a therapist. I have to talk this through with a professional. And that basically ended up turning into like, why do I let people treat me badly? It's like, why are you at a job that treats you like this? Why don't you think you deserve better? And that's where the real unraveling really began. I am worthy to be in the Lord's presence. I have just as much access to God as anyone who believes in any kind of hierarchy. And I'm just in so much of a better place mentally since I stopped believing that stuff. So that is the Catholicism's origin story. Once I did the therapy stuff, I started getting into tarot cards. I realized that the woods have always been my safest place, always where I felt most at peace and most myself. Like, so much of my childhood was going off to the woods to sing really loudly. And there was even one time I had missed the bus or something, and I knew I was going to get in so much trouble if they knew that I missed the bus. So I instead like snuck out to the woods, and then I slept there. I slept in the woods as a teenage girl. Slept in the woods. Um and so that's what kind of led me to believe, like maybe paganism might be up my alley. I do love a good tree. I'm still learning about paganism and the Sabbats and all that, and I'm learning a little bit about witchcraft. And that's where my journey is going right now. We'll see what happens from there. Something I'm really, really appreciating about this period of a term I like to use. I heard Catherine Hahn use this in an interview once, and I haven't stopped using it. As a recovering Catholic, something I'm really appreciating about learning about different spirituality paths is I don't need to have all of the answers right now. I am allowed to change and evolve, and I'm still as good of a person as my actions show that I am, and I don't need to live inside my head because a big ghost daddy in the sky is not always watching, and I just am physically healthier too because there's so much less stress in my life. An 8-year-old should not be having pelvic floor spasms. No one should be having pelvic floor spasms, but they are a result of stress, and an 8-year-old should not be having them, should not be having so much pain from a God that loves her. So thank you for sticking around and listening to this story. If there's anything you would like to hear me talk about or would like to discuss, I would love to hear your suggestions in the comments below. I was thinking maybe one of my next videos, if not the next one, I gotta go where the inspiration tells me to go. But I've been wanting to talk about Jesus's 40 days in the desert and like if that maybe was really just like a nature retreat, right? Like I would love to spend 40 days in the woods. That would spiritually align me for sure. So that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking of Jesus on his nature retreat. But if there's anything else you'd like me to talk about or talk about first, let me know. I still don't know how to end these videos, so I think I'm just going to open to another passage in the Bible again and read it randomly. I'm going to go towards the back now, see if it's actually about Jesus this time. Okay. We're in the second book of Maccabees. And where am I? Okay. So this is Maccabees chapter 11, verse 9. Immediately all of them together thanked God for his mercy. He had made them brave enough to attack not only men, but even the most savage animals, or even walls of iron. Yeah, I regularly fight walls of iron, so I can relate.